Verse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go to jump in. So Bitcoin did hit 70K this past week. We actually did a live stream where we caught it live, so that was pretty exciting. But right now, Bitcoin is at 68.5K. We basically been between 68 and 70K for essentially the entire weekend. And to give an update where the 20-week SMA is, it's currently at 46.1K, and the 21-week EMA is at around 47.6K. Now, the reason why we track this, if you're new, is because, generally speaking, you will expect it to occasionally check in with the 20-week SMA or the 21-week EMA. There have been plenty of cycles, right, where we just sort of regularly check in with it. And so long as you hold it as support, it gives sort of the all clear to continue higher. But there are times where you don't really check in with it. And it sort of the path ends up being a bit different. But in 2017, as long as you checked in with it every 3 to 4 months or so, it generally meant that you would go to a higher high, right? And I mean, every 3 to 4 months, sort of checking in with it. And then we got to the point where we didn't really get back down to it until about 20 weeks later or so. And then Bitcoin showed a lot of struggle trying to hold it as support and ultimately was unable to hold it as support. In 2019, we never really held it as support. We just got above it. And then when we finally got back down to it, we were unable to hold it as support. And that was also around that 20-week mark, 24 weeks or so. And then in 2021, right, we held it as support, leading to another leg up. And we actually did a lot of videos during this time saying, look, if we hold it as support, it's likely going to lead to some type of parabolic rally by Bitcoin. But what ended up happening is we did get a parabolic rally, but we did not test the 20-week SMA during this time. And when we finally did test it, over 30 weeks later, whether you want to measure it from like right there or further back, but let's just say 32 weeks later, we were unable to hold it as support. So again, the whole idea is that, when you get to the point where it's been 20 to 30 weeks without testing it, Bitcoin has shown an inability to hold it as support. Now, could this time be different? Maybe, but if you look at how long it has now been about 20 weeks or so, right? Now, in the short term, that doesn't really have any implications on Bitcoin. Even in this rally over here, after we got above, or after we sort of left that 20-week SMA, like 21 weeks later, Bitcoin was at this level and it still continued to push up for a couple more months before getting a larger pullback into the 20-week SMA, right? So it's not necessarily a suggestion that anything has to play out in the short term. In 2019, you can see that Bitcoin rallied until about week 12, but then it consolidated for a lot as the dominance of Bitcoin went up and alt Bitcoin pairs bled, right? So like alt Bitcoin pairs bled, leading to Bitcoin USD staying propped up for much longer than alt USD pairs, and eventually got back to the 20-week SMA and fell below it. So, right now, if Bitcoin were to go back down and retest it, it would require a 30% drop. And, the thing about that is in 2019, whenever you had QT and high rates just like today, we only got relatively shallow drops. And then once you ended up getting a larger drop, like 30% or so, to the 20-week estimate, 21-week EMA, it ended up signaling a reversal in the trend. So it's one of those things where, like in the same way, like this cycle, we've only had relatively shallow pullbacks of 20 to 22% or so, constantly making people want more. And that was why back over here, I was very clear that, look, guys, this could be sort of that pre-halving dip, the typical pre-halving dip that comes, and you might not get anything more than that, assuming that it plays out like all these prior 3 corrections by Bitcoin. And that was at 39K, and now we've gone all the way up to 70K, right? So Bitcoin essentially added $30,000 or more to its price in only about a month and a half. It just goes to show you how quickly the market can move. And I also think that market participants can get used to new prices really, really quickly. So while the bull market support band is pretty far down, and it sounds like absurd prices, like, 46K and whatnot, we were there not even that long ago. About a month ago, Bitcoin was at that price. It just feels so low because we've been accustomed to these higher prices for long. It's like when you're going up, you can never, it's hard for people to imagine ever going down. When you're going down, it's hard for people to imagine ever going up. But the thing to keep an eye on is the fact that we have been now about 20 to 21 weeks or so since really testing that 20-week SMA. And it really raises the question, well, whenever we do test it, is the integrity or is it going to be somewhat compromised just because it has been so long? It would have been more ideal for Bitcoin to actually test it as support here, rather, so that you can kind of confirm, move higher, come back, test it. Same thing that we saw previously, right? Same thing that we saw in 2017. When you get into these sort of these FOMO rallies like 2019, a couple of times, right? You'll see where you sort of fade into the 20-week SMA, but you don't actually get all the way back to it. And then it just leads to these FOMO rallies where everyone sort of piles in, even as you get into a late business cycle type environment as rates are high and QT continues. And then eventually that liquidity fades in the altcoin market. All Bitcoin pairs bleed, Bitcoin dominance goes up, and then Bitcoin finally reaches a point where it goes back below the 20-week moving average. So again, I mean that phase could still be some time away. My main sort of speculation as it has been is that these Bitcoin rallies are not only fueled by spot ETFs and people that are regular DCAing, but also the fact that altcoins are bleeding to Bitcoin, and that is something that we have continued to see for a long time. So I would still keep an eye on that, because that whenever alt Bitcoin pairs do break down, that might be a sign of a larger pullback by Bitcoin USD. And if you do get a larger pullback, let's say larger than 20 to 22%, then it might imply some type of shorter term reversal in the overall trend. I think the hard part with this sort of stuff, just like 2019, just like 2020 and late 2017, is that when you get into these manic modes, it's impossible to know, right, how high it's going to go before it actually does get that larger pullback. And that's why we've looked at so many different indicators, right? We've looked at USDT dominance and gold breaking out, and where alt Bitcoin pairs are and what they would need to get to in order to be collectively broken down, and where ETH Bitcoin needs to get to, right? So if you see all that confluence coming in, and you also get a larger correction by Bitcoin at some point, later this year, then that could imply, some type of trend reversal in at least the medium term. But as always, right, it's a fool's errand trying to predict exactly how high these rallies will go before those larger pullbacks happen. And so I think it makes sense to have a plan to navigate it, really, no matter what happens, right? React to what happens and have a plan based on that, I think, is what makes the most sense, rather than, trying to constantly predict exactly where the top is going to be or the local top is going to be. And we've looked at a number of different things, right? I mean, we've looked at say, the short-term bubble risk, and, right now Bitcoin is about 50% above its 20-week moving average, so it's certainly gone above. It's certainly more extended than where it was back over here in March of 2023 and also in December of 2023, right? So it has been more extended. And what you may notice is that from one sort of mania phase to another, the extension from the 20-week SMA is going down. Now, we can look at that in a different way. I've showed this many, many times. You can actually take the natural log of the price over the 20-week moving average and sort of connect the dots and see that, it's depending on how you want to connect the dots, right? You can say there's a little bit more wiggle room by Bitcoin USD to the upside if you connect the dots like that, or if you're a little bit more conservative, you can say that we've already reached that level, right? And, sort of what I'm saying is, again, like, it's impossible to predict the top, or at least the local top, but whenever there is a larger pullback in the market, look towards that 20-week SMA, that 21-week EMA, and the longer it takes us to get there, the harder it probably comes to actually hold it, just because we didn't really build up support along the way, right? In 2020, we did not build support along the way. 2019, we did not build support along the way, right? So whenever the bear market finally came for it, you had to go down slowly to test where was support actually. Same thing over here, right? You had to just slowly go down and keep testing it until you found where support was. When in the rally, there was no consolidation really to be found other than just a couple of weeks, right? And so from here, we haven't really seen anything like that as well, right? It's just been slowly moving up, or quickly moving up, a little consolidation, but no real test of the bull market support band, and then ultimately continuing higher, right? And so that is something that it continues to play out, right? And who knows exactly where it goes in the short term, but the extension of the 20-week SMA is at around 50%, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it in terms of, if we do start to fade to it later this year. My speculation, as I've said, the main two things to think about are what ETH USD did going into the merge, and what Bitcoin USD did going into the spot ETF, right? There was this rally into the spot ETF. With the merge with ETH, it rallied for about until a month before the merge. It topped, and then we had a lower high into the merge. So, I don't know if it's going to play out with Bitcoin like a rally into the halving or if it tops out about a month before the halving.